I stood outside the gleaming glass doors of Pinnacle Tech Solutions, clutching a manila folder that contained 5 years of financial records, customer testimonials, and proof that would finally vindicate everything I had built from nothing. The same building where, 18 months ago, I had been laughed out of a boardroom meeting and told my little cupcake business idea was nothing more than a suburban housewife's fantasy. Today I was here because they had called me, begging for a meeting, desperate to discuss partnership opportunities with what had become the fastest-growing dessert empire in the Pacific Northwest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and until 3 years ago, I was exactly what those condescending executives thought I was. A stay-at-home mom in suburban Portland, Oregon, whose biggest daily challenge was getting my twin daughters to soccer practice on time. My husband David worked as a software engineer, bringing home enough income for us to live comfortably in our modest ranch house, with the white picket fence and the golden retriever named Biscuit. I had a degree in business administration from Oregon State that I hadn't used in 8 years, and most days I felt like my brain was slowly turning to mush from endless conversations about homework assignments and playdates. The idea that would change everything started, ironically, with my daughters' complaints about school lunches. Emma and Sophie were in 4th grade, and every morning they would beg me to pack them something special for dessert, something that would make their friends jealous, and their day a little brighter. I had always been a decent baker, learning from my grandmother, who ran a small bakery in Taiwan before immigrating to America. But what started as simple chocolate chip cookies for lunchboxes gradually evolved into elaborate themed cupcakes that had the entire elementary school talking. Other parents began approaching me at pickup, asking if I would make cupcakes for their children's birthday parties. What began as a favor for friends slowly turned into a small side business. I charged just enough to cover ingredients, working out of my home kitchen, delivering orders in my minivan between school runs and grocery trips. The demand grew faster than I had anticipated. Within 6 months, I was making $300 a week selling custom cupcakes to families throughout our neighborhood. David was supportive but skeptical when I mentioned wanting to expand. He would pat my hand affectionately and suggest that my little baking hobby was perfect as it was, bringing in some extra spending money without the stress of a real business. His patronizing tone made my teeth clench, but I bit my tongue and smiled, the way I had learned to do during our 12 years of marriage. He meant well, I told myself. He was just being practical. But I could see potential that he couldn't. Every weekend, parents would drive across town specifically to order from me. I had a waiting list 2 weeks long. Food bloggers in Portland were starting to mention my cupcakes in their social media posts. A local coffee shop owner had approached me about supplying them with daily deliveries. The signs were everywhere that this could be something much bigger than a hobby, but every time I brought up the possibility of renting commercial kitchen space or applying for business loans, David would remind me about our stable life and suggest I not rock the boat. The breaking point came during a dinner party we hosted for David's coworkers from Pinnacle Tech Solutions. I had spent the entire day preparing an elaborate meal, and for dessert I served a selection of my signature cupcakes: lavender honey with cream cheese frosting, dark chocolate with salted caramel, and lemon blueberry with white chocolate ganache. The guests were effusive in their praise, taking photos of the beautiful presentations and asking where they could order more. Marcus Wellington, David's pompous supervisor, cornered me in the kitchen while I was cleaning up. He was holding his 3rd glass of wine and had that confident smirk that successful men get when they think they're being charming. "These little cakes are quite good, Sarah. You should think about selling them at the farmer's market or something. Make yourself some pin money while the girls are at school. Pin money." The phrase made my skin crawl, but I smiled politely and explained that I was already selling cupcakes and had been considering expanding into a real business. Marcus laughed, a condescending chuckle that made me want to throw my mixing bowl at his head. "A business? Oh, sweetheart, baking cupcakes isn't a business. It's a nice little hobby, but let's be realistic. The food industry is cutthroat. You have no experience in commercial operations, no understanding of food safety regulations, no marketing background. You'd be competing against established bakeries that have been around for decades." I felt my cheeks burning as he continued his lecture, but I kept my voice level. I actually have a business degree, and I've been researching the commercial requirements. There's definitely a market for premium custom desserts, especially with the growing trend toward artisanal foods. Marcus raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. A business degree? Well, that's adorable. But knowing the theory and actually running a successful company are completely different things. Take my advice, stick to what you know. Keep making your little treats for birthday parties, and leave the real business to people who understand how the world actually works. His wife Jennifer, who had been listening from the doorway, joined the conversation with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Oh, Marcus is absolutely right, Sarah. I tried to start a consulting business a few years ago, and it was such a disaster. These little domestic ventures always seem like great ideas until reality hits. You're so lucky to have David supporting the family so you can pursue these creative outlets, without the pressure of actually needing them to succeed. David, who had walked into the kitchen during this exchange, wrapped his arm around my shoulders in what I'm sure he thought was a supportive gesture. Sarah makes incredible cupcakes, but we're pretty happy with our life the way it is. No need to complicate things with the stress and uncertainty of starting a business. That night, after our guests had gone home and David was snoring peacefully beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and feeling something fundamental shift inside me. For years, I had accepted other people's definitions of what my life should be. I had been the good wife, the devoted mother, the woman who smiled and nodded when men explained why my dreams weren't practical or realistic. But Marcus's patronizing dismissal had ignited something I didn't even know existed within me. The next morning, while David was at work and the girls were at school, I did something I had never done before. I called in sick to my volunteer obligations, ignored the laundry and the grocery shopping, and spent 8 straight hours researching everything I could about starting a commercial baking business. I learned about health department regulations, commercial kitchen rental spaces, business licensing requirements, and food distribution laws. I studied successful bakery business models, analyzed local competition, and calculated startup costs. What I discovered was that Marcus was wrong about almost everything. The artisanal dessert market in Portland was not saturated, it was booming. There was a waiting list for commercial kitchen space because so many food entrepreneurs were starting successful businesses. The barriers to entry were significant, but not insurmountable, and my business degree, while 8 years old, had given me a solid foundation in financial planning and marketing principles. More importantly, I realized I had something that many food entrepreneurs lacked: a proven product with an established customer base. I wasn't starting from scratch. I was scaling up something that was...
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Already successful. My cupcakes weren't just delicious. They were Instagram-worthy works of art that commanded premium prices and generated word-of-mouth marketing wherever they appeared. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I opened a separate bank account and deposited the $2,000 I had saved from my cupcake sales over the past year. Then I filled out an application for a small business loan, listing myself as the sole proprietor of what I decided to call Sweet Rebellion Artisan Desserts. The name felt perfect. It represented exactly what I was doing: rebelling against everyone who had told me to stay small, stay safe, and stay satisfied with being someone's wife and someone's mother instead of being myself. Sweet Rebellion would be my declaration of independence from a life that had become too comfortable and too limiting. When David found out what I had done, his reaction was exactly what I had expected. He was hurt that I hadn't discussed it with him, worried about the financial risk to our family, and skeptical about my chances of success. We had our first real fight in years, with voices raised and accusations flying. He accused me of being reckless and selfish, of jeopardizing our stability for a fantasy. I accused him of not believing in me, and of wanting to keep me safely contained in a life that was making me feel invisible. The girls watched this argument with wide, frightened eyes, and I felt terrible about exposing them to conflict they couldn't understand. That night, David slept in the guest room, and I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being foolish and irresponsible. Maybe I should apologize and go back to making cupcakes for birthday parties and soccer team celebrations. But when I woke up the next morning and saw the business loan approval email in my inbox, something crystallized inside me. The bank had reviewed my application, my financial records, and my business plan, and they believed in Sweet Rebellion enough to invest in it. If a team of financial professionals thought my idea had merit, then maybe Marcus Wellington's wine-soaked opinions weren't worth the breath he had wasted expressing them. The first 6 months of Sweet Rebellion were the hardest and most exhilarating of my adult life. I rented space in a commercial kitchen facility in Southeast Portland, sharing the space with a food truck owner, a jam maker, and a woman who made artisanal dog treats. The kitchen was available to me from midnight to 6 in the morning, which meant I was baking while the rest of the world slept, then coming home to get the girls ready for school and pretending I wasn't exhausted. David remained skeptical, but gradually became more supportive, as he saw how hard I was working and how seriously I was taking every aspect of the business. I hired an accountant, obtained all the necessary permits and licenses, and invested in professional-grade equipment that produced consistent results even when I was making 5 times my previous volume. The real breakthrough came when I landed my first corporate contract. A downtown Portland law firm was hosting a client appreciation event and needed desserts for 200 people. Instead of the simple cupcakes I had been making, I created an elaborate dessert bar featuring mini tarts, macarons, and petit fours alongside my signature cupcakes. The event was a massive success, with guests asking for my business cards and the law firm's event planner immediately booking me for 3 more events. Word spread quickly through Portland's professional community. I started getting contracts for corporate events, wedding receptions, and high-end private parties. My prices had tripled from my neighborhood birthday party days, but demand continued to grow. I hired my first employee, a recent culinary school graduate named Maya, who shared my passion for creating edible art. Within a year, Sweet Rebellion had outgrown the shared commercial kitchen space. I signed a lease on my own facility in the Pearl District, complete with a small retail storefront and enough production space to handle large-scale orders. The local food scene took notice when Portland Monthly magazine featured Sweet Rebellion in their Rising Stars section, describing my desserts as, quote, architectural marvels that taste even better than they look. David's attitude toward my business had gradually shifted from skeptical tolerance to genuine pride. He started bragging to his coworkers about his wife's growing company, and I could see that he was finally beginning to understand that what I had built was not a hobby or a phase, but a legitimate enterprise that was contributing significantly to our family's financial security. The girls, now in 6th grade, had become my biggest cheerleaders. They helped with simple tasks like arranging display boxes and wiping down counters, and they loved telling their friends that their mom owned a real bakery. Emma wanted to learn how to make macarons, while Sophie was fascinated by the business side and would sit at our kitchen table helping me organize order sheets and calculate profit margins. By the end of my 2nd year in business, Sweet Rebellion was generating more revenue than David's salary at Pinnacle Tech Solutions. We had moved to a larger house in the hills overlooking the city. The girls were taking dance lessons and art classes, and I was able to hire a full-time staff of 6 employees. The woman who had been dismissed as a suburban housewife with unrealistic dreams was now running a company that was being courted by investors and featured in regional business publications. But success brought new challenges, and the biggest one came in the form of expansion opportunities that required more capital than I could generate from current operations. 3 different restaurant groups had approached me about licensing Sweet Rebellion products for their dessert menus. A boutique hotel chain wanted to feature my pastries in their lobby cafes. A gourmet grocery chain was interested in carrying packaged versions of my most popular items. Each of these opportunities represented significant growth potential, but they also required substantial upfront investment in equipment, staff, and production capacity. I needed a business partner with both capital and industry connections, someone who understood the food service sector and could help navigate the complexities of scaling up operations. That's when I made the decision that would bring my story full circle. Despite every instinct telling me it was a terrible idea, I decided to approach Pinnacle Tech Solutions about a potential partnership. They had recently launched a venture capital division focused on investing in local businesses with high growth potential. Their deep pockets and corporate connections could provide exactly what Sweet Rebellion needed to reach the next level. More importantly, I wanted Marcus Wellington and everyone else who had dismissed my dreams to see exactly what their little suburban housewife had accomplished. I wanted them to understand that the woman they had patronized and underestimated had built something more successful than they had ever imagined possible. The irony was delicious. The same company where my husband worked, where I had been told my cupcake dreams were nothing more than adorable fantasy, was now being approached by my multi-million-dollar enterprise-seeking partnership opportunities. I spent 2 weeks preparing for the meeting, creating a presentation that would demonstrate not just Sweet Rebellion's current success, but the massive growth potential that the right partnership could unlock. Financial projections, market analysis, competitive assessments, expansion timelines. I assembled everything needed to prove that backing Sweet Rebellion wasn't just a good investment. It was an opportunity they couldn't afford to miss. The night before the meeting, I stood in my walk-in closet selecting the perfect outfit. I chose a tailored black suit that projected authority and competence, paired with shoes that added 3 inches to my height and a confidence that could be heard in the click of my heels across marble floors. I looked like what I had become, a successful businesswoman who commanded respect and demanded to be taken seriously. David wished me luck as I left the house that morning, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. He knew as well as I did that this meeting was about more than business partnerships. It was about vindication, about proving that the dreams they had mocked had substance and value. It was about showing everyone who had underestimated me exactly how wrong they had been. As I pulled into the parking garage beneath Pinnacle Tech Solutions, I felt the same determination that had driven me through those first, exhausting months of midnight baking sessions and early morning deliveries. But now it was backed by 2 years of proven success, financial records that spoke louder than any argument, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have built something remarkable despite everyone betting against you. The receptionist who greeted me in the lobby was the same one who had barely looked up from her computer screen 18 months earlier when I had nervously asked for directions to the conference room where I would meet my husband's coworkers. Today, she smiled warmly and offered me coffee while I waited, clearly recognizing my name from the appointment schedule. Marcus Wellington emerged from the elevator looking exactly the same as he had at that dinner party where he had dismissed my ambitions with condescending laughter. But something fundamental had changed in the dynamic between us. Today, I wasn't the wife of one of his employees asking for career advice. I was a successful entrepreneur considering whether his company was worthy of my business. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "Thank you so much for coming in. We're really excited to learn more about Sweet Rebellion and discuss how Pinnacle might be able to support your continued growth." I shook his hand firmly, maintaining eye contact and projecting the confidence that came from knowing I held all the cards in this meeting. "Marcus, it's good to see you again. I'm looking forward to sharing what we've accomplished and exploring whether there might be mutual benefits to working together." As we walked toward the conference room, I reflected on how much had changed since that night, when he had lectured me about the impossibility of turning cupcakes into a real business. The woman walking beside him now wasn't the same person who had stood in her kitchen accepting condescending advice about staying in her lane. I had spent months preparing for this moment, not just by building a successful company, but by documenting every step of the journey. I had kept records of every person who had doubted me, every obstacle I had overcome, and every milestone I had achieved. Today wasn't just about securing investment for Sweet Rebellion's next phase of growth. Today was about proving that sometimes the people everyone underestimates are the ones who change the game entirely. And I was ready to show them exactly what they had missed when they decided my dreams weren't worth taking seriously. The conference room at Pinnacle Tech Solutions was exactly as I remembered it from David's company holiday parties. All glass walls and chrome furniture designed to intimidate rather than welcome. But today, instead of feeling out of place among the corporate power players, I felt like I belonged here. The presentation materials I carried weren't desperate pleas for validation. They were documentation of what I had already achieved and blueprints for where I intended to go next. Marcus sat across from me, flanked by 2 other executives I didn't recognize, their expensive suits and calculated smiles creating an atmosphere of barely concealed skepticism. Despite his warm greeting in the lobby, I could see the doubt in his eyes as he shuffled through the preliminary information I had provided about Sweet Rebellion. He was clearly struggling to reconcile the suburban housewife he remembered with the business owner sitting across from him. "So, Sarah," he began, his tone carrying the same patronizing undertone I remembered from that dinner party. David mentioned that your little baking venture has been quite successful. We'd love to hear more about what you've been up to. Little baking venture. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt the familiar fire ignite in my chest. But this time, instead of biting my tongue and smiling politely, I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projection system with practiced efficiency. "Thank you for the opportunity to present," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I think you'll find that Sweet Rebellion has evolved significantly beyond what you might expect from a small local operation." The first slide of my presentation filled the wall-mounted screen, Sweet Rebellion's logo, alongside our current revenue figures, employee count, and growth projections. I watched Marcus's eyebrows rise as he absorbed the numbers, his confident smirk faltering slightly as he realized this wasn't going to be the quaint hobby presentation he had anticipated. Last fiscal year, Sweet Rebellion generated $2.8 million in revenue, I continued, clicking to the next slide that showed a detailed breakdown of our income streams. We've maintained consistent month-over-month growth of 18% for the past 14 months, with gross margins averaging 62% across all product lines. The other executives leaned forward in their chairs, suddenly paying attention in a way they clearly hadn't expected to when this meeting was first scheduled. These weren't the numbers of a woman making cupcakes for birthday parties. These were the metrics of a serious business operation that demanded respect. Our client base includes some of Portland's most prestigious law firms, hotels, and corporate event planners, I said, clicking through slides that showed testimonials and photos from high-profile events. We've catered events for Nike, Intel, and the Portland Trail Blazers, with contracts that have ranged from intimate executive dinners to product launch celebrations for over 1,000 guests. Marcus cleared his throat and adjusted his tie, clearly recalibrating his approach, as he realized this meeting required more intellectual engagement than he had prepared for. "These are impressive numbers, Sarah. I have to admit, I'm surprised by the scale you've achieved so quickly." "Growth has been rapid," I agreed, "but it's been strategic rather than accidental. Every expansion decision has been data-driven. Every investment carefully calculated to maximize return while maintaining the quality standards that differentiate us from commodity bakeries." I clicked to a slide showing Sweet Rebellion's facility, complete with professional photography that showcased our commercial-grade equipment and pristine production areas. We currently operate out of a 12,000-square-foot facility in the Pearl District, with capacity to handle simultaneous production of multiple large-scale orders. Our team includes 6 full-time employees, all with formal culinary or business training. The woman sitting to Marcus's left, who had introduced herself as Victoria Chen from their venture capital division, spoke up for the first time. "What's your current production capacity, and how scalable is your operation model?" This was the question I had been hoping for, the one that would allow me to demonstrate the real potential that had brought me to this meeting. Our current facility can handle up to 15,000 individual dessert units per week without compromising quality or delivery timelines. But more importantly, we've developed systems and processes that are highly replicable. I advanced to a slide showing detailed operational flowcharts and standardized recipes. Every aspect of our production has been documented and systematized. Recipe cards with precise measurements and timing, quality control checklists, inventory management protocols, customer service scripts. An experienced baker could walk into any Sweet Rebellion location and produce identical results using our established procedures. The third executive, who had been introduced as Jonathan Rivers from Business Development, leaned back in his chair with what looked like grudging respect. "You're talking about franchising potential." Among other expansion opportunities, I confirmed. We've identified 3 distinct growth paths that could scale Sweet Rebellion from a regional success story to a national brand. I clicked through slides detailing each expansion strategy, complete with financial projections, market analysis, and implementation timelines. The first option involved opening company-owned locations in major metropolitan areas, starting with Seattle and San Francisco. The second focused on licensing our products and recipes to existing restaurants and hotels. The third outlined a franchise model that would allow qualified operators to open Sweet Rebellion locations under our brand and operational guidance. Conservative projections show we could achieve $25 million in annual revenue within 3 years through strategic expansion, I said, letting that number sink in. More aggressive growth scenarios, supported by adequate capital investment, could reach 50 million or higher. Victoria was taking notes now, her initial skepticism replaced by the focused attention of someone evaluating a serious investment opportunity. What kind of capital requirements are we looking at for these expansion scenarios? That depends on which growth path we pursue, I replied, clicking to detailed funding breakdowns. Restaurant licensing requires minimal capital investment but offers lower margins and less control over brand consistency. Company-owned expansion requires significant upfront investment but provides maximum quality control and profit potential. Franchising falls somewhere in the middle, with moderate capital needs and shared risk and reward with franchise partners. Marcus was studying the financial projections with the intensity of someone who had finally grasped that this wasn't a social favor for an employee's wife, but a legitimate business proposition that could generate substantial returns for his company. What made you consider Pinnacle as a potential partner for this expansion? The question gave me an opening to address the elephant in the room, the history between us that had brought an extra layer of meaning to this meeting. Pinnacle has a reputation for identifying high growth potential in businesses that others might overlook, I said carefully. Your venture capital division has a track record of supporting entrepreneurs who are ready to scale successful local operations into regional or national brands. What I didn't say, but what everyone in the room understood, was that Pinnacle had completely overlooked the potential sitting in their own employee's kitchen 18 months earlier. The woman they had dismissed as a suburban housewife with unrealistic dreams was now presenting them with a multi-million-dollar investment opportunity. We'd need to conduct thorough due diligence before making any investment decisions, Jonathan said, but his tone suggested genuine interest rather than polite dismissal. Financial audits, market analysis, competitive assessments, the standard evaluation process for opportunities of this scale. Of course, I agreed. I've brought copies of our audited financial statements for the past 2 years, along with detailed breakdowns of revenue sources, operating expenses, and growth metrics. We've also prepared comprehensive market research, documenting the artisanal dessert industry's expansion trajectory and Sweet Rebellion's competitive positioning within that market. I had spent weeks preparing these materials, knowing that this meeting would require more than impressive revenue numbers and ambitious projections. Serious investors would want to see evidence that Sweet Rebellion's success was sustainable and scalable, not just a temporary market anomaly or the result of my personal involvement in every aspect of operations. The documentation I provided painted a picture of a business that had evolved far beyond its humble origins in my home kitchen. Sweet Rebellion had systems, processes, documented procedures, and measurable results. We had overcome the typical challenges that derail small food businesses, like inconsistent quality, supply chain disruptions, and seasonal demand fluctuations. We had built something that could function and grow with or without my daily involvement in production and operations. Victoria flipped through the financial statements with practiced efficiency, her expression revealing nothing as she absorbed 2 years of carefully documented growth and profitability. Your margins are significantly higher than industry averages for commercial baking operations. Premium positioning allows premium pricing, I explained. Sweet Rebellion isn't competing with grocery store bakeries or chain restaurants on price. We're competing on quality, presentation, and service. Our target customers are willing to pay more for desserts that exceed their expectations and create memorable experiences for their events. What about seasonality? Marcus asked. Don't most bakeries struggle with significant revenue fluctuations around holidays and events? The question demonstrated that he was finally taking this seriously enough to consider the operational challenges that could impact profitability. We've diversified our revenue streams specifically to minimize seasonal variations, I replied, clicking to a slide showing monthly revenue patterns. Corporate events and restaurant partnerships provide steady base-level income throughout the year, while wedding season and holidays create peaks that boost annual totals without creating unsustainable dependency on specific time periods. Jonathan was studying the competitive analysis section with particular interest. How do you maintain market differentiation as you scale? Won't expansion invite more direct competition? This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that successful businesses needed to address, and I was prepared with detailed analysis of competitive threats and mitigation strategies. Our primary competitive advantages aren't easily replicable, I said. Recipe development that took years to perfect, relationships with premium ingredient suppliers, reputation and brand recognition that was built through consistent excellence. New competitors can copy our menu items, but they can't duplicate our established customer relationships or operational expertise. The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions of supply chain management, quality control protocols, marketing strategies, and expansion timelines. What had begun as what Marcus clearly expected to be a courtesy meeting for an employee's wife had evolved into serious business negotiations between equals. As we wrapped up the formal presentation, Victoria gathered her notes and looked at me with what appeared to be genuine respect. "Sarah, this has been incredibly impressive. We'll need some time to review all the materials and conduct our internal evaluation process. But I can tell you that Sweet Rebellion represents exactly the kind of high-growth opportunity our venture capital division was created to support. What's your timeline for making investment decisions?" I asked, maintaining the professional tone that had carried me through the entire presentation. "Typically 4 to 6 weeks for opportunities of this scale," Jonathan replied. "We'll want to visit your facility, interview key staff members, possibly speak with some of your major clients. Standard due diligence procedures." Marcus stood and extended his hand again, but this time, the gesture felt different. There was no condescension in his grip, no patronizing smile accompanying his words. "Sarah, I have to say, this was not at all what I expected when we scheduled this meeting. What you've built is truly remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, packing my laptop and presentation materials with the satisfaction of someone who had just delivered exactly the performance they had prepared for. "I look forward to hearing from your team once you've completed your evaluation." As I walked back through the lobby toward the parking garage, I reflected on how completely the dynamic had shifted during that 90-minute presentation. When I had arrived, I was David's wife asking for a meeting about her little baking business. When I left, I was a successful entrepreneur being courted by investors who recognized the value of what I had created. But the real satisfaction wasn't in their changed attitudes or their interest in funding Sweet Rebellion's expansion. The real victory was in proving to myself that the dreams they had dismissed were not only achievable, but valuable enough to attract serious investment from the same people who had once laughed at them. The drive home gave me time to process what had just happened and to plan for what would come next. Regardless of whether Pinnacle decided to invest in Sweet Rebellion, this meeting had accomplished something important. It had demonstrated that the business I had built was substantial enough to command respect from the corporate community that had once dismissed it as a hobby. David was waiting when I arrived home, clearly anxious to hear how the meeting had gone. The girls were at their after-school dance classes, which gave us privacy to discuss what could be a significant change in our family's financial future. "How did it go?" he asked before I had even set down my purse. "Better than I expected," I said, settling onto the couch beside him. "They're interested, really interested." Victoria, from their venture capital division, said Sweet Rebellion represents exactly the kind of opportunity they look for. David's face lit up with pride and excitement. "That's incredible, Sarah. What happens next?" "Due diligence. They'll spend the next few weeks evaluating everything about the business. Financial audits, facility inspections, client interviews. If we pass their evaluation process, they'll make a formal investment offer. And if they don't?" I smiled, feeling confident in a way that had nothing to do with Pinnacle's potential investment. "Then we pursue one of the other expansion strategies. We've proven that Sweet Rebellion has what it takes to succeed. Pinnacle would be a great partner, but they're not our only option." That evening, after dinner and homework help and bedtime stories, I sat in my home office reviewing the notes I had taken during the meeting. Beyond the business discussions and financial projections, I found myself thinking about the moment when Marcus's attitude had shifted from patronizing tolerance to genuine respect. It hadn't happened when I showed him our revenue numbers or growth projections. It had happened when he realized that I had built something he couldn't dismiss or diminish. The woman he had lectured about leaving real business to people who understood how the world worked had created a more successful operation than most of his portfolio companies. 3 days later, Victoria called to schedule a facility tour and staff interviews. 2 weeks after that, Jonathan visited with their financial auditor to review our books and operational procedures. A month after our initial presentation, Marcus himself came to Sweet Rebellion during our peak production hours. Watching our team execute a complex multi-event order with precision and efficiency that impressed even his corporate-trained eye. The due diligence process was thorough and occasionally stressful, but every evaluation confirmed what I already knew. Sweet Rebellion was a well-run business with enormous growth potential. Our financial records were immaculate, our operational procedures were documented and consistent, and our staff was professional and knowledgeable. Most importantly, our reputation in Portland's food scene was sterling, with client testimonials that validated our claims about quality and service. 6 weeks after our initial meeting, Victoria called with news that would change everything. "Sarah, I'm calling with our final decision on Sweet Rebellion." The investment committee voted unanimously to approve a partnership proposal. My heart raced as she outlined their offer: $2 million in initial funding for expansion, with additional capital available based on performance milestones. In exchange, Pinnacle would receive a 30% equity stake in Sweet Rebellion and representation on our board of directors. "The terms are very favorable," Victoria continued. "We want to see Sweet Rebellion succeed, and we believe this partnership will provide the resources and expertise you need to achieve your growth objectives." After hanging up, I sat in my office for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. The company that had dismissed my dreams was now investing $2 million in making those dreams a reality. The people who had told me to stick to birthday party cupcakes were now betting their reputation and capital on Sweet Rebellion's ability to become a national brand. But more than the financial validation, this represented something deeper. It proved that persistence and competence could overcome initial skepticism, that results could change minds, and that success was the ultimate response to condescension. That evening, I called Maya and the rest of my team to share the news about our new partnership and expansion plans. Their excitement was infectious, and I realized that Sweet Rebellion's success had created opportunities not just for me, but for everyone who had believed in what we were building together. The next morning, I drafted a resignation letter for David to submit to Pinnacle Tech Solutions. Not because I was angry or vindictive, but because Sweet Rebellion was about to grow beyond anything we had imagined, and I would need his full-time expertise in operations and logistics to manage that expansion successfully. When Marcus heard about David's resignation, he called personally to congratulate both of us on Sweet Rebellion's investment success, and to express his hope that this new partnership would benefit everyone involved. His tone was warm and genuine, with no trace of the condescension that had characterized our previous interactions. "Sarah," he said before ending the call, "I want you to know that I have enormous respect for what you've accomplished. When we first met, I made some assumptions that were clearly wrong. You've built something remarkable, and I'm glad Pinnacle gets to be part of its future." The apology was gracious and seemed sincere, but it couldn't change the fact that his initial dismissal had nearly prevented me from pursuing the dreams that were now generating millions in revenue and creating jobs for a dozen employees. Success had vindicated my vision, but it had also revealed how easily potential could be dismissed by people who couldn't see beyond their own limited expectations. As I prepared for Sweet Rebellion's next phase of growth, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 18 months earlier, I had been a stay-at-home mother, whose biggest daily challenge was coordinating carpool schedules. Now I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, with expansion plans that could create hundreds of jobs and establish Sweet Rebellion as a nationally recognized brand. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. There had been 18-hour days, financial stress, moments of doubt, and obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. But every challenge had been overcome through persistence, planning, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're building something valuable. Most importantly, I had learned that other people's limitations didn't have to become my own. Marcus's inability to see potential beyond his own experience had nearly convinced me to abandon dreams that turned out to be completely achievable. His condescending advice about staying in my lane had almost prevented me from discovering capabilities I didn't know I possessed. The woman who had once accepted patronizing lectures about the impossibility of turning cupcakes into a real business was now preparing to open Sweet Rebellion locations in multiple states, hire dozens of employees, and prove that sometimes the people everyone underestimates are the ones who change the game entirely. 6 months after signing the partnership agreement with Pinnacle Tech Solutions, I stood in the kitchen of our second Sweet Rebellion location in downtown Seattle, watching my team prepare for the grand opening celebration. The space was 3 times larger than our original Portland facility, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the production area with natural light, and a customer-facing bakery counter that showcased our most photogenic creations, like edible jewelry in a luxury display case. Maya had been promoted to regional operations manager and was training the Seattle team with the same attention to detail that had made our Portland location so successful. Every recipe card was laminated and color-coded, every procedure documented with step-by-step photographs, every quality standard measured and monitored to ensure that a Sweet Rebellion cupcake in Seattle would be identical to one made in Portland. David moved through the space with the confidence of someone who had found his calling after years of working in a career that never truly fulfilled him. His transition from software engineering to business operations had been smoother than either of us had anticipated, and his analytical mind proved perfectly suited to managing the complex logistics of multi-location food production and distribution. "The catering order for Microsoft is ready for delivery," he announced, checking items off his tablet as our delivery team loaded elegant white boxes into refrigerated trucks. 18 dozen assorted cupcakes, 4 dozen macarons, and 2 custom celebration cakes for their product launch event. Microsoft, the same company where Marcus Wellington's brother worked as a senior executive. The same brother who had specifically requested Sweet Rebellion for their most important corporate event of the year after tasting our desserts at a mutual friend's wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me that the business Marcus had once dismissed as unrealistic was now considered prestigious enough for Microsoft's executive leadership. The grand opening celebration drew a crowd that exceeded even our optimistic projections. Seattle's food scene was notoriously competitive, with sophisticated palates and high expectations for any newcomer claiming to offer something special. But the line of customers stretched around the block, with food bloggers documenting every detail and local news crews interviewing patrons about their experience with Portland's hottest dessert export. Victoria from Pinnacle's venture capital division attended the opening, bringing with her several other potential investors who had expressed interest in Sweet Rebellion's continued expansion. She moved through the crowd with obvious pride, introducing me to contacts as the CEO of one of their most successful portfolio companies. "Sarah's growth trajectory has exceeded every projection we made during our initial investment analysis," she told a reporter from Seattle Business Journal. "Sweet Rebellion represents exactly the kind of innovative local business that deserves regional and national recognition." The validation felt surreal. Less than 2 years earlier, I had been baking cupcakes in my home kitchen while my husband's colleagues explained why my dreams weren't practical. Now those same colleagues were reading about Sweet Rebellion's expansion in business publications and seeing our logo on delivery trucks throughout their own city. But the moment that crystallized just how completely everything had changed came 3 weeks after the Seattle opening, when my phone rang with a call I never expected to receive. "Sarah, this is Marcus Wellington from Pinnacle Tech Solutions. I hope I'm not catching you at a busy time. I was actually in the middle of reviewing architectural plans for our 3rd location in San Francisco, but something in Marcus's tone suggested this wasn't a routine business call from our investment partners." "Not at all, Marcus. What can I do for you?" There was a long pause before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice carried an ounce uncertainty I had never heard from him before. "I'm calling with what might seem like an unusual request. My position at Pinnacle has been eliminated as part of a corporate restructuring, and I'll be leaving the company at the end of the month." I set down the architectural drawings and focused entirely on the conversation. Marcus Wellington, the man who had lectured me about leaving real business to people who understood how the world worked, was about to ask me for something. "I'm sorry to hear about the restructuring," I said, genuinely meaning it despite our complicated history. Corporate layoffs are always difficult, regardless of the circumstances. "Thank you. The severance package is generous, and I'm confident I'll find another position eventually. But in the meantime, I wanted to reach out about a possibility that might seem presumptuous given our past interactions. He paused again, clearly struggling with whatever he was trying to say. Sarah, I've been following Sweet Rebellion's growth since our partnership began, and I'm incredibly impressed with what you've accomplished. Your business acumen, your strategic thinking, your ability to execute complex expansion plans. It's exactly the kind of leadership that successful companies need. I waited, sensing that he was building towards something significant, but wanting to let him arrive at it in his own time. I know this might sound crazy, he continued, but I was wondering if there might be any opportunities within Sweet Rebellion for someone with my background in corporate development and strategic partnerships. I have extensive experience in business expansion, vendor relationships, and corporate sales. I think I could contribute meaningfully to Sweet Rebellion's continued growth. The request hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that went far beyond a simple employment inquiry. Marcus Wellington, who had once suggested I stick to making cupcakes for birthday parties, was asking me for a job. That's certainly something we could discuss, I said carefully. Sweet Rebellion is growing rapidly, and we're always interested in qualified candidates who could help us manage that expansion effectively. I realize this puts us both in an awkward position, Marcus said, his voice growing more confident as he sensed that I wasn't immediately dismissing the idea. I want you to know that I have nothing but respect for what you've built, and I would be honored to contribute to Sweet Rebellion's success in any way you felt was appropriate. After we ended the call, I sat in my office for a long time thinking about the conversation and what it represented. The man who had once patronized me about my unrealistic business dreams was now seeking employment with the company he had dismissed as a suburban housewife's fantasy. But more than the obvious irony, his call raised important questions about Sweet Rebellion's hiring practices and company culture. We had grown from a one-person operation to a regional business, with nearly 30 employees across 3 locations. Every hire had been based strictly on qualifications and cultural fit, regardless of personal history or previous relationships. Marcus did have relevant experience in corporate partnerships and business development, areas where Sweet Rebellion could benefit from additional expertise as we pursued relationships with national restaurant chains and hotel groups. His track record at Pinnacle demonstrated competence in exactly the kinds of negotiations and deals that could accelerate our expansion timeline. The question wasn't whether he could do the job effectively, but whether hiring him would create complications that outweighed his potential contributions. Some of my employees knew our history from David's stories about his former colleagues. Maya in particular had heard about the dinner party where Marcus had dismissed Sweet Rebellion as a hobby, and she might struggle to respect his authority if I brought him on board. That evening I discussed Marcus's request with David over dinner while the girls worked on homework in the next room. His initial reaction was skeptical, bordering on hostile. "He's got some nerve asking you for a job after the way he treated you," David said, his voice tight with protective anger. 2 years ago he was lecturing you about staying in your lane, and now he wants to work for the company he said would never succeed. "People can change their minds when presented with new evidence," I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced of my own argument. His experience could be valuable for our expansion into corporate partnerships. There are plenty of qualified candidates who didn't spend years undermining your confidence and dismissing your dreams. Why would you even consider giving him a chance to do it again from inside the company? David's concerns were valid, but they also highlighted something important about leadership and forgiveness that I was still learning to navigate. Holding grudges felt petty and counterproductive, when the real issue was whether Marcus could contribute meaningfully to Sweet Rebellion's continued success. "Maybe this is an opportunity to demonstrate something important about who we are as a company," I said slowly, working through my thoughts as I spoke them. "We make hiring decisions based on qualifications and potential, not personal history or past relationships. If Marcus can help Sweet Rebellion grow, then his previous skepticism about our potential becomes irrelevant." Over the next week, I spoke with several members of my leadership team about the possibility of hiring Marcus for a business development role. The reactions were mixed but generally supportive of whatever decision I felt was best for the company's growth. Maya was the most vocal opponent of the idea, expressing concerns that went beyond personal loyalty to practical considerations about team dynamics and company culture. "He spent years treating you like your dreams didn't matter," she pointed out during a management meeting. What message does it send to our other employees if we reward that kind of attitude with a senior position? But Jonathan, from our Portland location, offered a different perspective that resonated with my own evolving thoughts about the situation. Maybe it sends the message that we're confident enough in what we've built to rise above past conflicts. If he can help us grow faster and serve our customers better, then hiring him demonstrates strength rather than weakness. 2 weeks after Marcus's initial call, I invited him to meet me at our Portland headquarters for a formal interview. I wanted to hear his ideas for Sweet Rebellion's corporate partnerships and assess whether his enthusiasm for joining our team was genuine or simply desperation driven by his job loss. He arrived precisely on time, dressed in the same expensive suit style that had once intimidated me but now seemed almost quaint, compared to the casual confidence I had developed through years of running a successful business. But something fundamental had changed in his demeanor. The condescending superiority that had characterized our previous interactions was completely absent, replaced by genuine humility and respect. "Sarah, thank you so much for considering my request," he said as we settled into my office. "I know this situation is unusual, and I appreciate your willingness to evaluate me based on what I might contribute, rather than our previous interactions." "Tell me about your vision for Sweet Rebellion's corporate partnerships," I said, skipping past pleasantries to focus on business. "Where do you see opportunities for growth that we might not be pursuing effectively?" His response was impressive in its depth and specificity. Marcus had clearly researched our current client base and identified potential expansion opportunities that aligned perfectly with our capabilities and brand positioning. He outlined strategies for approaching national hotel chains, corporate catering contracts, and licensing deals that could increase our revenue significantly, while maintaining the quality standards that differentiated us from mass-market competitors. The key is positioning Sweet Rebellion not as a regional bakery looking to expand, but as a premium brand that happens to be based in the Pacific Northwest, he explained. "Your reputation for quality and innovation should open doors with luxury hotel chains and high-end corporate clients who value exclusivity and craftsmanship." His analysis was sophisticated and well-researched, demonstrating the kind of strategic thinking that could accelerate our growth timeline significantly. But beyond his professional qualifications, I was struck by the genuine respect he showed for what Sweet Rebellion had accomplished, and his apparent understanding of the company culture we had worked to create. "I want to address something directly," I said as our interview was winding down. "You were openly skeptical about Sweet Rebellion's potential when we first discussed my business plans. What changed your mind?" Marcus met my eyes directly, his expression serious and thoughtful. "Honestly, I was wrong. Completely embarrassingly wrong. I let my own assumptions and biases prevent me from recognizing what you were capable of achieving." He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I thought I understood the food service industry because I had invested in a few restaurant partnerships. I thought I understood small business challenges because I had reviewed countless startup proposals. But I didn't understand you, and I didn't understand the market opportunity you had identified." "What would be different if you joined Sweet Rebellion?" I asked. "I would approach every decision and recommendation with the humility that comes from knowing I was spectacularly wrong about something important," he replied. "I would listen more and assume less. Most importantly, I would work every day to prove that your decision to give me a second chance was justified." The interview lasted 2 hours, covering everything from expansion strategies to company culture to performance metrics. By the time Marcus left, I had a clear sense that he could contribute meaningfully to Sweet Rebellion's continued growth. But I still wasn't certain whether hiring him was the right decision for our team dynamics and company values. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of continuing to wrestle with the choice alone, I called a meeting with our entire management team to discuss Marcus's candidacy openly and transparently. "I want everyone's input on this decision," I told the group assembled in our conference room. "Hiring Marcus could accelerate our growth significantly, but it also raises questions about company culture and team dynamics that affect all of us." The discussion that followed was frank and sometimes heated, with strong opinions expressed on both sides. Maya maintained her concerns about rewarding past dismissive behavior, while others focused purely on his qualifications and potential contributions. But the conversation that ultimately influenced my decision came from David, who had remained silent through most of the meeting before finally speaking up. 2 years ago, Marcus made assumptions about Sarah's capabilities that were completely wrong, he said quietly. But if we refuse to hire him based on those past assumptions, aren't we making the same kind of mistake? Judging someone's future potential based on past behavior instead of current evidence? The logic was compelling and aligned with the values we had tried to build into Sweet Rebellion's culture from the beginning. We hired based on merit and potential, we focused on results rather than politics, and we believed that people could grow and change when given appropriate opportunities. 3 days later, I called Marcus to offer him a position as Director of Corporate Partnerships, with responsibility for developing relationships with national chains and large-scale institutional clients. His salary would be competitive but not excessive, and his performance would be measured against specific revenue and partnership targets. His response was immediate and heartfelt. "Sarah, thank you. I know this decision wasn't easy, and I want you to know that I don't take this opportunity lightly. I'm committed to proving that your faith in me is justified." Marcus's first day at Sweet Rebellion was awkward for everyone involved, but his professional competence and genuine humility quickly won over most of the skeptics on our team. He worked longer hours than required, asked thoughtful questions, and demonstrated the kind of collaborative approach that successful partnerships require. More importantly, he delivered results. Within 3 months, he had secured contracts with 2 major hotel chains and initiated discussions with a luxury grocery chain about carrying Sweet Rebellion products in their gourmet sections. His industry connections and corporate experience opened doors that would have taken us years to approach independently. But the moment that truly validated my decision to hire Marcus came 6 months after he joined our team, during a corporate presentation to executives from a national restaurant chain considering licensing Sweet Rebellion desserts for their upscale locations. The presentation was going well, with positive responses to our quality demonstrations and financial projections, when one of the executives asked a question that could have derailed the entire negotiation. "We've heard great things about Sweet Rebellion's products and reputation," the executive said, "but we're concerned about working with a relatively new company. How do we know you'll be able to maintain consistency and quality as you scale up production for our locations?" Before I could respond, Marcus stepped forward with quiet confidence. "I understand your concerns about scalability," he said, "but I want to share something that might address those questions from a unique perspective." He clicked to a slide showing Sweet Rebellion's growth trajectory over the past 3 years, but instead of focusing on revenue numbers, he highlighted our consistency metrics across multiple locations and production volumes. 3 years ago, I made the mistake of underestimating Sweet Rebellion's potential," Marcus said, looking directly at the restaurant executives. "I thought it was a small local business that couldn't possibly compete in the commercial food service market. I was completely wrong." The room was silent as he continued. "What I failed to recognize then, and what I now understand after working here for 6 months, is that Sweet Rebellion's success isn't based on luck or temporary market conditions. It's based on systems, standards, and leadership that are specifically designed to maintain quality and consistency, regardless of scale." He clicked through slides showing our standardized procedures, quality control protocols, and performance metrics across all locations. Every Sweet Rebellion product is made using identical ingredients, procedures, and standards, whether we're producing 50 units or 5,000. Our founder built scalability into the operation from the beginning, which is why we've been able to maintain customer satisfaction scores above 95% even as we've expanded into new markets. The presentation concluded with signed agreements for licensing Sweet Rebellion desserts to over 200 restaurant locations nationwide, representing the largest expansion opportunity in our company's history. As we packed up our materials after the meeting, Marcus turned to me with an expression I had never seen from him before: genuine gratitude mixed with professional respect. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be part of this," he said quietly. "Working for Sweet Rebellion has been the most fulfilling professional experience of my career. Not just because of the success we're achieving, but because of the way you've built this company and the values you've embedded in everything we do." 1 year after Marcus joined our team, Sweet Rebellion had grown to 12 locations across 6 states, with licensing agreements that put our products in over 300 restaurants and hotels nationwide. Our employee count had reached nearly 200 people, and our annual revenue was approaching $25 million. The transformation from suburban housewife's hobby to nationally recognized brand had taken less than 4 years. But the journey had changed more than just my professional circumstances. It had fundamentally altered how I saw myself and how others saw me, proving that potential exists in places where people often don't think to look for it. The dinner party where Marcus had dismissed my dreams felt like something that had happened to a different person entirely. The woman who had stood in her kitchen accepting condescending advice about staying in her lane had evolved into someone who created lanes where none had existed before. But perhaps the most satisfying transformation was watching Marcus evolve, from someone who dismissed others' potential to someone who actively worked to help realize it. His success at Sweet Rebellion had taught him the same lesson my own journey had taught me, that assumptions about what's possible are often just failures of imagination disguised as practical wisdom. The last conversation I had with Marcus before he was promoted to Vice President of Strategic Partnerships captured the evolution of our relationship and the deeper lessons of Sweet Rebellion's success story. "Sarah," he said during a quarterly review meeting, "I want you to know that working here has changed how I think about business and leadership in ways that go far beyond this job." "How so?" I asked, curious about his perspective on the changes I had observed in his approach to work and relationships. "I used to think that experience and industry knowledge were the most important qualifications for success," he replied thoughtfully. "But watching you build Sweet Rebellion has taught me that vision and persistence often matter more than credentials or traditional business background." He paused, looking out the window at the delivery trucks loading orders for restaurants across the country. "You saw possibilities that none of us could see, and you were willing to work harder than anyone thought was reasonable to make those possibilities real. That's not something they teach in business school or corporate training programs." The conversation reminded me of something I had learned during those first exhausting months of building Sweet Rebellion, that success often requires ignoring other people's limitations and focusing entirely on your own potential. The people who had dismissed my dreams weren't intentionally cruel. They were simply unable to imagine possibilities beyond their own experience. Today, as I sit in my office overlooking Sweet Rebellion's flagship Portland location, watching customers line up for products that began as simple cupcakes for school lunchboxes, I reflect on the journey that brought me here, and the lessons it holds for anyone whose dreams have been dismissed as unrealistic or impractical. The biggest lesson isn't about proving doubters wrong or achieving revenge through success, though both of those outcomes have their own satisfaction. The biggest lesson is about the danger of accepting other people's limitations as your own reality. Marcus Wellington was wrong about Sweet Rebellion's potential not because he was stupid or malicious, but because he couldn't imagine capabilities he had never witnessed. The tragedy would have been if I had accepted his limitations as the truth about what was possible for someone with my background and circumstances. Sweet Rebellion succeeded because I chose to test my own assumptions about what I could achieve rather than accepting other people's assumptions about what I couldn't. The woman who had never run a commercial kitchen learned to manage complex production schedules. The mother who had never negotiated corporate contracts learned to secure million-dollar licensing deals. The suburban housewife who had been told to stick to birthday party cupcakes learned to build a business that created hundreds of jobs and generated tens of millions in revenue. Every person who had dismissed Sweet Rebellion's potential had been operating from incomplete information about what determination and strategic thinking could accomplish. Their skepticism said more about their own limitations than mine. As I prepare for tomorrow's board meeting, where we'll discuss expanding Sweet Rebellion into international markets, I'm reminded that the biggest obstacles to achieving extraordinary things are often the ordinary assumptions that everyone accepts as realistic. The next time someone tells you that your dreams aren't practical or your goals aren't achievable, remember that they're speaking from their own experience and limitations, not yours. The question isn't whether they can imagine you succeeding. The question is whether you're willing to work hard enough to prove that their imagination isn't the boundary of what's possible. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated isn't to argue or explain, but simply to build something so undeniably successful that the conversation changes entirely. Sweet Rebellion's growth from kitchen hobby to national brand didn't happen to prove Marcus Wellington wrong. It happened because I chose to focus on proving myself right. And in the end, that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.